The name Marie Antoinette evokes spectacle, fashion, and tragedy, images of powdered wigs, elaborate gowns, and the infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," dance through our collective memory. But behind the glamour of Versailles, behind the political intrigue and revolutionary fervor, there were 4 young lives born into unimaginable privilege, and within a decade 2 were dead, 1 imprisoned and 1 exiled. What became of her children, the sons and daughters who were born to rule an empire but instead witnessed its collapse? Today, we follow the complete story of each child of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, their births in golden cradles, their upbringing in the world's most opulent palace, and their fates as revolution consumed their world. From royal nurseries in Versailles to prison cells in the Temple, these children's lives encapsulate the fall of an age. Let's travel through their world and discover whatever happened to the children of Marie Antoinette. Velvet halls, whispered gossip, a kingdom on the edge. Behind Marie Antoinette's glittering legend were 4 children born to rule and forced to survive a revolution. From silk-cradled nights at Versailles to iron doors in the Temple prison, their lives trace the fall of an age. A sister who outlived a dynasty, a dauphin lost to illness, a boy king broken in captivity, and a baby gone before the storm. Tonight we follow their footsteps through privilege, panic, and peril, and ask, what really happened to the children of Marie Antoinette? Between 1778 and 1786, Marie Antoinette gave birth to 4 children who would each face dramatically different destinies. Born into the absolute monarchy of France, they lived their early years as the most privileged children in Europe. Yet revolution would transform them from royalty into prisoners, from heirs to symbols, from children into casualties of history. Today we examine each life chronologically, not just their births and deaths, but their personalities, their relationships, their struggles, and ultimately, their legacies. We'll discover how each child's story reflects the broader collapse of the Ancien Regime and the birth of modern France. Our 4 subjects span nearly the entire timeline of this dramatic period. Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, born in 1778, would be the only one to survive into adulthood, carrying the weight of her family's memory into the 19th century. Louis-Joseph Xavier François, the first Dauphin, died at age 7, just as the Revolution began. His younger brother, Louis Charles, became the second Dauphin, but died in revolutionary custody at age 10. And Marie-Sophie Hélène Béatrix lived only 11 months, yet her brief existence captures the fragility that haunted the royal family. Each chapter will explore their births, their childhood experiences in the dying days of absolute monarchy, their roles during the Revolution, and their ultimate fates. We'll examine their relationships with their father, Louis XVI, whose own execution would shatter their world, and trace how their stories became intertwined with the greatest political upheaval in French history. The children of Marie Antoinette were witnesses to, victims of, and symbols of the end of royal France. Their stories are both intimate family dramas and epic historical narratives. On December 19, 1778, at the Palace of Versailles, Marie Antoinette gave birth to her first child. The infant was a daughter, christened Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, and immediately styled Madame Royale, a title reserved for the eldest daughter of the King of France. After 8 years of marriage and intense pressure to produce an heir, the Queen had finally given the nation a royal child. The birth was attended by members of the court according to ancient tradition, with doctors, ladies-in-waiting, and nobles crowding into the Queen's chambers to witness the arrival. While the child was not the male heir France expected, her birth was celebrated throughout the kingdom. Church bells rang, cannons fired from the Invalides, and the people of Paris illuminated their windows in celebration. From her first breath, Marie-Thérèse was surrounded by unprecedented luxury. Her nursery at Versailles was appointed with silk-lined cradles, golden toys, and a small army of attendants, including wet nurses, governesses, and guards. Yet beneath this opulence lay the rigid protocol of court life that would shape her character from infancy. Marie-Thérèse's early years unfolded within the carefully orchestrated world of Versailles. Her education began before her 3rd birthday under the supervision of the Duchesse de Polignac, one of Marie Antoinette's closest friends. The young princess learned to read and write in French, speak German and Italian, play the harpsichord, and conduct herself according to the elaborate etiquette that governed every aspect of royal life. Her relationship with her parents was notably affectionate by royal standards. Louis XVI, despite his legendary awkwardness in public, proved a devoted father who delighted in spending time with his children. He would often retreat from the pressures of kingship to play simple games with Marie-Thérèse or read to her from history books. Marie Antoinette, criticized for her frivolity by court observers, demonstrated fierce maternal devotion to her daughter. The family's private life centered around Marie Antoinette's retreat at the Petit Trianon, where they could escape the suffocating formality of Versailles. Here, Marie-Thérèse experienced something approaching a normal childhood, playing in gardens designed to look like an idealized countryside, feeding chickens at the Queen's Hamlet, and enjoying picnics with her parents and growing number of siblings. As brothers arrived, Louis-Joseph in 1781, Louis-Charles in 1785, Marie-Thérèse adapted to her role as eldest child with a seriousness that would characterize her entire life. Court observers noted her intelligence and dignity even as a young child, though some commented on a certain severity in her manner that seemed premature for one so young. The disruption came gradually, then suddenly. The Estates General convened in May 1789 when Marie-Thérèse was 10 years old. As political crisis engulfed France, her protected world began to crumble. The family was forced to return from Versailles to Paris in October 1789, taking residence at the Tuileries Palace under what amounted to house arrest. The August 10, 1792 attack on the Tuileries marked the effective end of Marie-Thérèse's childhood. At 13, she was imprisoned with her family in the Tower of the Temple, a medieval fortress that became their prison. Here, stripped of servants and ceremony, the royal family lived in cramped quarters under constant surveillance. These 3 years of captivity would define Marie-Thérèse's character forever. She witnessed her father's trial and execution on January 21, 1793, an event that devastated the 14-year-old princess. Her mother's deteriorating mental and physical health, her younger brother's separation from the family and subsequent death, and her own complete isolation from the outside world created a trauma that would never fully heal. During this period, Marie-Thérèse demonstrated remarkable resilience. She maintained a daily routine of prayer and study, refused to acknowledge the Republican government's authority, and steadfastly maintained royal protocol even in captivity. When guards demanded she address them as equals, she reportedly replied that she knew only how to speak to kings and their subjects. Her mother, Marie Antoinette, was executed on October 16, 1793, leaving Marie-Thérèse truly alone. At 15, she had witnessed the destruction of everything she had known, her family, her world, her very identity as a princess of France. After 3 years of imprisonment, Marie-Thérèse was released on December 19, 1795, her 17th birthday, in exchange for French prisoners held by Austria. She crossed into Austrian territory as the sole survivor of her immediate family, carrying with her the memories of parents, brothers, and a way of life that had vanished forever. In Austrian exile, Marie-Thérèse gradually rebuilt her life under the protection of her mother's family, the Habsburgs. Emperor Francis II treated her as the rightful princess of France and provided her with a household befitting her rank. Yet adjustment proved difficult. Years of imprisonment had left her suspicious of others, deeply religious to the point of mysticism, and utterly devoted to preserving the memory of her family. On June 10, 1799, Marie-Thérèse married her cousin Louis Antoine, Duke of Angoulême, the eldest son of the future King Charles X. The marriage, arranged to strengthen Bourbon claims to the French throne, proved loving if childless. Louis Antoine was patient with his wife's traumatic memories and shared her commitment to royalist restoration. When Napoleon fell and the Bourbon monarchy was restored in 1814, Marie-Thérèse returned to France for the first time since childhood. Now, 35 years old, she had become the living symbol of Bourbon legitimacy and suffered. As Duchess of Angoulême and later Dauphine of France, when her husband became heir, she played a crucial role in the restored monarchy. Her political influence was considerable. Marie-Thérèse advised her uncle Louis VIII and later her father-in-law Charles VII on matters of state, always advocating for the most conservative positions. She opposed any compromise with revolutionary or Napoleonic traditions, believing that only a complete return to the pre-1789 order could legitimize the monarchy. During the 100 Days when Napoleon returned from Elba, Marie-Thérèse demonstrated remarkable courage. She organized resistance in the south of France, rallying royalist forces and attempting to maintain Bourbon authority even as the king fled to Belgium. Her efforts ultimately failed, but they established her reputation for personal bravery and unwavering loyalty to the crown. The July Revolution of 1830, which overthrew Charles X and brought Louis-Philippe to power, sent Marie-Thérèse into final exile. She never accepted the July monarchy as legitimate, spending her remaining years in various European capitals while maintaining her claim as the rightful Queen of France. Marie-Thérèse's relationship with Louis XVI profoundly shaped her worldview and character. She inherited his deep piety, his sense of duty, and his belief in the divine right of kings. More importantly, she became the keeper of his memory and the defender of his reputation. Throughout her life, she worked to rehabilitate her father's image, commissioning memoirs, supporting historical research, and ensuring that his piety and good intentions were remembered alongside his political failures. Her father's execution instilled in her an uncompromising opposition to revolutionary ideologies. She saw the revolution not as a response to legitimate grievances, but as a catastrophic moral collapse that had destroyed the natural order of society. This conviction made her a powerful advocate for conservative restoration throughout Europe. Marie-Thérèse died on October 19, 1851, at Frosdorf Castle in Austria. She had lived 72 years, witnessing the destruction of the old order, the rise and fall of Napoleon, and the emergence of modern Europe. As the last direct descendant of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, her death marked the final end of a bloodline that had ruled France for centuries. Her legacy is complex. To royalists, she represented the martyred innocence of the old regime and the possibility of restoration. To Republicans, she embodied the stubborn refusal of the nobility to accept democratic change. To historians, she serves as a unique witness to the most dramatic transformation in French history, a woman who lived through the death of one world and the birth of another. Her life story became a powerful symbol of suffering and endurance that influenced European conservative thought throughout the 19th century. She proved that even the most privileged could be destroyed by revolutionary change, and that survival sometimes required the complete reconstruction of identity and purpose. On October 22, 1781, at Versailles, Marie Antoinette delivered the child that France had been waiting for, a male heir to the throne. Louis-Joseph Xavier François was born healthy and beautiful, immediately receiving the title of Dauphin and becoming second in line to the throne after his father. The nation erupted in celebration more magnificent than any seen for the birth of his sister 3 years earlier. The birth secured Marie Antoinette's position at court and fulfilled her primary duty as Queen of France. Te Deums were sung in Notre Dame Cathedral, free wine flowed in the streets of Paris, and the royal family's popularity reached heights it would never again achieve. The Dauphin's birth seemed to promise the continuation of the Bourbon dynasty for generations to come. From his earliest days, Louis-Joseph was groomed for kingship with an intensity that surpassed even the elaborate preparation given to previous Dauphins. His household included not only nurses and tutors, but advisors who began planning his future education in statecraft, military affairs, and diplomacy. The weight of a kingdom's expectations rested on shoulders barely old enough to hold up his head. The first signs of trouble appeared when Louis-Joseph was barely 2 years old. Court physicians noticed that the young Dauphin tired easily and seemed smaller than children his age. By 1784, it became clear that something was seriously wrong. The child developed a pronounced curvature of the spine, a condition that caused him considerable pain and made normal physical activity difficult. The royal doctors, constrained by the medical knowledge of their era, could do little beyond prescribing rest and various treatments that were likely more harmful than helpful. Louis-Joseph was fitted with an iron corset designed to straighten his spine, a device that caused him constant discomfort, but did nothing to halt the progression of his condition. Despite his physical ailments, Louis-Joseph displayed remarkable intelligence and sensitivity. His tutors noted his quick grasp of languages and his natural aptitude for music. He showed particular affection for his younger siblings, especially his brother Louis Charles, with whom he would play gentle games suited to his limited physical abilities. The boy's illness created a crisis of confidence within the royal family. Louis XVI consulted the finest physicians in Europe, while Marie Antoinette alternated between periods of desperate hope and crushing despair. The king's own father had died young, and the specter of another premature death haunted the family. As Louis-Joseph's condition worsened, the royal physicians recommended a change of air. In 1787, the family moved the young Dauphin to the Château de Meudon, located on a hill outside Paris where the air was considered more healthful than at Versailles. This relocation became a retreat from court life that allowed the family to focus entirely on the sick child's care. At Meudon, Louis-Joseph experienced what were probably the happiest months of his short life. Away from the rigid protocol of Versailles, he could live more naturally, spending quiet days with his parents and siblings. Marie Antoinette rarely left his side, reading to him, playing simple games, and trying to provide comfort for his increasing pain. Louis XVI, despite the growing political crisis that would culminate in the Revolution, devoted enormous time and attention to his eldest son. The king would carry the boy in his arms when walking became too difficult, and courtiers noted that father and son developed an unusually close bond during these months of crisis. The young Dauphin's condition continued to deteriorate throughout 1788 and early 1789. He suffered from fever, difficulty breathing, and episodes of severe pain that left him bedridden for days at a time. Modern medical analysis suggests he likely suffered from spinal tuberculosis, a condition that would have been invariably fatal given 18th century medical capabilities. The spring of 1789 brought both the convening of the Estates General and the final decline of the Dauphin's health. As political crisis engulfed France, Louis-Joseph lay dying at Meudon, attended by his parents who faced the impossible choice between their dying son and their endangered kingdom. On June 4, 1789, just weeks after the Third Estate had declared itself the National Assembly, 7-year-old Louis-Joseph died in his mother's arms. His last words were reportedly a request to see his younger brother Louis Charles, who had been kept away to protect him from infection. The young Dauphin's death came at the worst possible moment for the monarchy. Louis XVI was forced to interrupt crucial political negotiations to mourn his son, while Marie Antoinette became almost catatonic with grief. The death deprived them of emotional reserves they desperately needed to face the revolutionary crisis. Louis-Joseph's death automatically transferred the title of Dauphin to his 4-year-old brother Louis Charles, a child completely unprepared for the role. The shift also meant that the monarchy's future now depended on a much younger heir who would be more vulnerable to the political upheavals ahead. The funeral arrangements revealed the monarchy's deteriorating position. While Louis-Joseph was interred at Saint-Denis with appropriate ceremony, the occasion lacked the magnificent pomp that would have attended such an event in earlier reigns. Popular attention was focused on political events rather than royal mourning. Court observers noted that the child's death seemed to break something fundamental in Marie Antoinette's spirit. Already criticized for her perceived frivolity and Austrian origins, she now retreated into a grief that her enemies characterized as self-indulgent weakness in the face of national crisis. Louis XVI's relationship with his eldest son represented everything the king hoped to achieve as a father and ruler. Despite his public awkwardness, Louis XVI proved tender and devoted in private, spending countless hours with his sick child and demonstrating a paternal warmth that surprised courtiers accustomed to royal distance. The king's grief at his son's death was profound and lasting. Courtiers reported that Louis XVI never fully recovered from the loss, and historians have argued that the emotional devastation contributed to his increasingly ineffective response to the revolution. The death of his heir, and with it the natural succession he had planned, seemed to rob the king of his sense of purpose. Louis-Joseph's brief life became a symbol of innocence destroyed by forces beyond human control. Royalist writers later portrayed him as a martyr whose pure soul was too good for the corrupt world of revolution. His death was seen as an omen of the catastrophes that would befall his family and France itself. The first Dauphin's legacy is that of promise unfulfilled and potential destroyed. His intelligence and character, glimpsed only briefly before illness claimed him, suggested he might have grown into an effective ruler capable of guiding France through its revolutionary transformation. Instead, his death left the throne to fall to his younger brother, who was too young to defend it, and ultimately contributed to the complete collapse of the Bourbon dynasty. His story reminds us that even kings are vulnerable to the random cruelties of fate, and that personal tragedy and political crisis often intertwine in ways that shape the course of history. On March 27, 1785, Marie Antoinette gave birth to her second son at Versailles. Louis Charles was a robust, healthy baby who seemed to embody everything his parents had hoped for in a royal child. Unlike his sickly older brother, Louis Charles displayed boundless energy and a cheerful disposition that endeared him to everyone at court. Initially created Duke of Normandy according to royal tradition, Louis Charles enjoyed a carefree early childhood. Court observers noted his striking resemblance to his mother, with her distinctive Habsburg features, blonde hair, and animated expressions. He was an intelligent child who learned quickly and displayed a natural charm that suggested he might overcome the political difficulties facing the monarchy through sheer personality. The young Duke's early years were spent in the relatively relaxed atmosphere of the Queen's private apartments and the Petit Trianon. Here, away from court protocol, he could play like any child of his class, with toy soldiers, pet animals, and elaborate games organized by his governesses. His relationship with his older sister Marie-Therese was particularly close, and she often served as his protector and guide. The death of his brother Louis-Joseph on June 4, 1789, transformed 4-year-old Louis Charles from a carefree younger son into the heir to the throne of France. Almost overnight, he became the Dauphin, with all the expectations and pressures that title entailed. The timing could not have been worse. As the child assumed his new role, the Estates General was transforming into the National Assembly, and revolution was beginning to reshape France. Louis Charles was too young to understand the political crisis engulfing his family, but he could sense the change in atmosphere around him. The relaxed, playful environment of his early childhood disappeared, replaced by constant tension and anxiety among the adults in his life. His parents, devastated by the loss of their eldest son and overwhelmed by political events, struggled to provide the stability he needed. The new Dauphin's education took on greater urgency. His tutors began intensive instruction in languages, history, and mathematics, while court officials debated how to prepare him for a throne that might not exist by the time he reached adulthood. The pressure on such a young child was enormous, yet he seemed to adapt with remarkable resilience. The October 1789 March on Versailles forced the royal family to relocate to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where they lived under increasing restrictions. For 6-year-old Louis Charles, this represented another dramatic change in his young life. The Tuileries, while grand, felt like a prison compared to the freedom he had enjoyed at Versailles and Trianon. During the family's residence at the Tuileries from 1789 to 1792, Louis Charles experienced a peculiar form of childhood. While still accorded the respect due to a dauphin, he lived under constant surveillance by revolutionary guards. His every movement was watched, his education monitored, and his contact with the outside world strictly controlled. Despite these restrictions, Louis Charles retained much of his natural cheerfulness during these years. He formed friendships with some of his guards, played games in the palace gardens, and continued his studies under modified conditions. His mother maintained as normal a routine as possible, insisting on regular meals, lessons, and playtime, even as their world collapsed around them. The failed flight to Versailles in June 1791 marked a turning point in Louis Charles's young life. At 6 years old, he participated in his family's desperate attempt to escape France, not understanding that their capture would seal their fate. The return to Paris in disgrace exposed him to the fury of crowds who now viewed the royal family as traitors to the nation. The storming of the Tuileries on August 10, 1792, ended whatever remained of royal dignity and began the family's imprisonment in the Temple Tower. For 7-year-old Louis Charles, this medieval fortress became both home and prison for the remainder of his life. The conditions were harsh: cramped quarters, minimal servants, and constant surveillance, yet the family initially remained together. During the early months of imprisonment, Louis Charles still enjoyed some semblance of childhood. His father, Louis XVI, took personal charge of his education, teaching him Latin, geography, and history. The king also played games with his son and tried to maintain normal family routines despite their circumstances. These father-son interactions represented some of the few bright moments in an increasingly dark situation. Marie Antoinette, despite her own deteriorating mental state, remained devoted to her son's care. She taught him to read and write, told him stories, and tried to shield him from the worst aspects of their situation. The Queen's maternal love provided some stability in a world gone mad. The trial and execution of Louis XVI on January 21, 1793, devastated 8-year-old Louis Charles. According to royalist tradition, he automatically became King Louis XVII upon his father's death, though the Republican government refused to recognize his claim. The traumatic loss of his father, witnessed indirectly through the reactions of his mother and sister, marked the beginning of his final decline. On July 3, 1793, the revolutionary authorities separated Louis Charles from his mother and sister, placing him in the care of Simon the Cobbler, a man chosen specifically to eliminate any traces of royal bearing from the child. This separation from his family represented the cruelest phase of his imprisonment and began the systematic destruction of his spirit. Under Simon's guardianship, the 8-year-old boy was subjected to deliberate brutalization designed to break his royal identity. He was forced to sing revolutionary songs, taught to use profanity, and encouraged to denounce his own family. The child, who had once been the hope of the Bourbon dynasty, was transformed into a tool of revolutionary propaganda. The psychological and physical abuse took its toll rapidly. Louis Charles became withdrawn, stopped speaking, and developed various physical ailments that worried even his captors. When Simon was dismissed in January 1794, the boy was left largely alone in his cell, attended only by guards who provided minimal care. For the final 18 months of his life, Louis Charles lived in conditions of appalling neglect. He rarely left his cell, received inadequate food and medical care, and was denied human companionship. The bright, cheerful child had become a shadow of his former self, broken by systematic cruelty and isolation. On June 8, 1795, 10-year-old Louis Charles died in his cell at the Temple. The official cause of death was listed as scrofula, though modern analysis suggests he may have suffered from tuberculosis, cancer, or the cumulative effects of abuse and neglect. His death went almost unnoticed by the revolutionary government, which had already moved beyond the need to use him as a symbol. The boy's death presented the authorities with an unexpected problem. Despite years of propaganda portraying him as a broken child who had rejected his royal heritage, many still viewed him as the legitimate King of France. His funeral was deliberately modest to avoid creating a shrine for royalist sentiment. News of Louis Charles's death spread slowly through the royalist networks of Europe. In exile, his uncle, the future Louis XVIII, immediately proclaimed himself King of France, but the death of the child created a powerful martyr for the royalist cause. Stories of his suffering and courage began circulating within days of his burial. Almost immediately after Louis Charles's death, rumors began circulating that he had been secretly rescued from the Temple and that another child had died in his place. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, numerous pretenders claimed to be the lost Dauphin, creating one of history's most persistent identity mysteries. These claims were fueled by inconsistencies in official records, the secretive nature of his final months, and the natural desire to believe that such an innocent victim might have escaped his fate. The most famous pretender, Karl Wilhelm Naundorf, attracted significant support and legal recognition in several European countries. The mystery was finally resolved in 2000 through DNA analysis of a heart preserved from Louis Charles's autopsy. Comparison with hair samples from Marie Antoinette and other family members definitively proved that the child who died in the Temple was indeed the son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The lost Dauphin had never escaped his prison. Louis Charles's relationship with Louis XVI, though brief, profoundly influenced his short life. The king's devotion during their imprisonment provided the child with stability and love during his most vulnerable years. Louis XVI's careful attention to his son's education and character development reflected his hopes that the boy might someday restore both the monarchy and the Bourbon family's honor. The king's execution shattered this relationship and left Louis Charles emotionally adrift at a crucial moment in his development. The loss of his father, combined with separation from his mother and systematic abuse, created trauma from which he never recovered. In many ways, Louis Charles died spiritually on the day his father was executed. His physical death 2 years later was merely the final act of a longer tragedy. Louis Charles's legacy extends far beyond his brief life. He became the ultimate symbol of innocence destroyed by political extremism, a child whose suffering demonstrated the human cost of revolutionary violence. Royalist writers transformed him into a martyr whose purity contrasted sharply with the corruption of his captors. The story of Louis XVI influenced European conservative thought throughout the 19th century, providing a powerful argument against democratic revolution and popular sovereignty. His death was portrayed as the inevitable result of challenging divine authority and traditional social order. In modern historical analysis, Louis Charles represents the vulnerability of children caught in political upheavals beyond their control. His story serves as a reminder that even the most privileged can become victims of historical forces, and that the cost of political transformation is often paid by the most innocent. His brief life encompasses the entire trajectory of the French Revolution, from the hope of reform through the terror of radical change to the exhaustion that followed. The cheerful child who might have become a king instead became a symbol of an age that destroyed its own children in pursuit of an impossible, perfect society. On July 9, 1786, at the Palace of Versailles, Marie Antoinette gave birth to her fourth and final child. The infant daughter was christened Marie Sophie Hélène Béatrix and immediately received the title Madame Sophie, following the tradition of naming royal daughters after deceased relatives. Her birth came at a time when the royal family appeared to have successfully fulfilled their dynastic obligations: 2 sons to secure the succession and 2 daughters to cement diplomatic alliances through marriage. The birth itself was unremarkable by royal standards, attended by the usual crowd of courtiers and officials required by protocol. However, the political context surrounding Madame Sophie's arrival was already troubling. France faced mounting financial crisis, social unrest was growing throughout the kingdom, and criticism of Marie Antoinette had reached new heights of virulence. The Queen's 4th pregnancy had been the subject of malicious gossip and political attacks that cast shadows over what should have been a joyful occasion. Unlike her siblings' births, which had been occasions of national celebration, Madame Sophie's arrival generated relatively modest public response. The French people, struggling with economic hardship and increasingly critical of royal excess, showed less enthusiasm for yet another mouth to feed from the public treasury. This muted reception foreshadowed the challenges facing the monarchy in its final years. From birth, Madame Sophie displayed signs of weakness that concerned the royal physicians. She was smaller than her siblings had been as infants, and seemed to lack the robust health that had characterized even the sickly Louis-Joseph in his early months. The Queen, already anxious about her children's well-being, watched her youngest daughter with growing alarm. Despite the attention of the finest medical experts in France, Madame Sophie's condition deteriorated steadily throughout her first months of life. She suffered from recurring fevers, difficulty feeding, and a general failure to thrive that puzzled her doctors. Modern medical analysis suggests she may have suffered from a congenital condition or succumbed to one of the many infant diseases that claimed so many lives in the 18th century. The baby's illness placed additional strain on an already troubled royal family. Marie Antoinette, criticized for her supposedly frivolous lifestyle, spent long hours nursing her sick daughter and consulting with physicians. Louis XVI, facing mounting political pressure, was forced to divide his attention between affairs of state and family crisis. During her brief life, Madame Sophie was cared for in the royal nursery at Versailles, attended by wet nurses and surrounded by the same luxury that had marked her siblings' early years. Yet unlike them, she was too weak to benefit from the elaborate toys, beautiful clothes, and careful attention lavished upon her. Her existence was confined to the struggle for survival that defined her every day. On June 19, 1787, Madame Sophie died at Versailles. She was 11 months and 10 days old, having never developed the personality or relationships that would have made her a distinct individual in the eyes of history. Her death, while tragic for her parents, was not unexpected given her prolonged illness and the high rate of infant mortality even among the privileged classes. The funeral arrangements for Madame Sophie reflected both royal protocol and the family's private grief. She was interred at Saint-Denis, the traditional burial place of French royalty, with ceremonies appropriate to her rank but necessarily modest given her age. The court observed proper mourning periods, but the death of a royal infant, while sad, was not considered a major historical event. For Marie Antoinette, the loss of her youngest child represented another blow to her maternal happiness and royal duty. Having experienced the joys of successful childbirth with her 3 surviving children, the Queen was devastated by this reminder of mortality's reach, even into the most protected chambers of Versailles. The death intensified her protective feelings toward her remaining children and contributed to her growing anxiety about their safety. Louis XVI's response to his daughter's death was characteristically private and dignified. The king, who had proven himself a devoted father to his surviving children, mourned quietly while maintaining his public duties. The loss reminded him of his own mortality and the fragility of the dynasty he represented, thoughts that would become increasingly relevant as political crisis engulfed his reign. Madame Sophie's brief existence achieved unexpected immortality through the artistry of Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, Marie Antoinette's favorite portrait painter. In 1787, shortly after the child's death, Vigée-Lebrun completed a famous portrait of Marie Antoinette with her children that was intended to rehabilitate the Queen's public image by emphasizing her role as a devoted mother. The painting, known as Marie Antoinette and Her Children, originally included 4 figures: the Queen, Marie-Thérèse, Louis-Joseph, and baby Louis Charles. However, an empty cradle appears in the lower right corner of the composition, dramatically representing the absent Madame Sophie. This artistic choice transformed a conventional royal portrait into a poignant meditation on loss and mortality. The empty cradle became one of the most powerful symbols associated with the royal family's tragic fate. Art historians have interpreted it as both a specific memorial to the dead infant and a prophetic symbol of the dynasty's coming extinction. The image captures the fragility of life, even at the height of privilege and power. The painting's exhibition at the Salon of 1787 generated significant public discussion. Rather than softening criticism of Marie Antoinette, the portrait with its empty cradle seemed to emphasize the Queen's foreign origins and personal sorrows at a time when the nation demanded attention to public rather than private concerns. The artistic memorial to Madame Sophie thus became part of the political narrative that would ultimately destroy her family. Louis XVI's relationship with Madame Sophie, while brief, illustrated his character as both a father and a king. His careful attention to his dying daughter's medical care demonstrated the private tenderness that contrasted with his public stiffness. The king's grief at her death, documented in family correspondence, revealed the emotional depth that his political enemies claimed he lacked. The loss of his youngest child reinforced Louis XVI's sense of vulnerability and divine judgment. Raised to believe in the sacred nature of kingship, he interpreted personal tragedies as potential signs of heavenly displeasure with his reign. Madame Sophie's death thus contributed to the spiritual crisis that would characterize his final years. Historically, Madame Sophie represents the countless forgotten victims of an age in transition. Her brief life and early death remind us that even the most spectacular historical events are built upon foundations of individual human experience, joy, love, loss, and grief that transcend political circumstances. Her story also illustrates the precarious nature of dynastic succession in an era before modern medicine. The death of any royal child represented not just personal tragedy but potential political crisis, as the loss of heirs could destabilize entire kingdoms. In Madame Sophie's case, her death removed a potential diplomatic asset and reduced the family's ability to forge alliance through marriage. The infant princess's legacy lies not in achievements or actions, but in her symbolic power. She represents innocence cut short, potential unfulfilled, and the random cruelty of fate that could touch even the most protected lives. In the broader story of Marie Antoinette's children, Madame Sophie serves as a reminder that tragedy stalked the royal family long before revolution brought its more spectacular catastrophes. Her empty cradle in Vigée-Lebrun's portrait continues to move viewers more than 2 centuries after her death, testament to the enduring power of maternal love and loss to transcend political and historical boundaries. The 4 children of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette embody both the promise and the tragedy of their age. Born into unprecedented privilege at the pinnacle of absolute monarchy, they lived to witness, and in 3 cases die during, the complete transformation of their world. Their collective story maps perfectly onto the broader narrative of French history between 1778 and 1851, from the final flowering of the Ancien Regime through revolution, empire, restoration, and the emergence of modern Europe. Only one of the 4 survived to adulthood. Marie-Thérèse lived 72 years, carrying the weight of her family's memory and the burden of their unfulfilled destinies. Her survival allowed the preservation of first-hand testimony about the royal family's last years and ensured that their story would be remembered from the perspective of those who lived it, rather than only through the accounts of their enemies or historians. The 3 who died young, Louis-Joseph at 7, Louis-Charles at 10, and Marie-Sophie at 11 months, became symbols of innocence destroyed by forces beyond their control. Their deaths illustrated the human cost of political upheaval and the vulnerability of even the most privileged to the random cruelties of disease, politics, and fate. Each child's story reflects different aspects of their parents' characters and the challenges they faced. Marie-Thérèse inherited her father's sense of duty and her mother's strength, enabling her to survive imprisonment and build a new life in exile. Louis-Joseph embodied the hope and fear surrounding royal succession. His promising intelligence cut short by illness, just as his father's reign faced its gravest crisis. Louis-Charles represented the ultimate victim of revolutionary extremism, a child transformed from royal heir to political prisoner to martyred symbol. Marie-Sophie, in her brief existence, captured the fragility that haunted the entire family. Their relationships with Louis XVI reveal him as a devoted father whose private tenderness contrasted sharply with his public ineffectiveness. Through his children's eyes, we see not the weak king of revolutionary propaganda, but a loving parent who struggled to protect those he cherished most while fulfilling the impossible demands of absolute rule in an age of democratic awakening. The children's fates also illuminate Marie Antoinette's character beyond the caricatures of revolutionary journalism. Her fierce maternal devotion, her struggles to maintain normal family life amid political chaos, and her desperate attempts to protect her children reveal a woman far more complex than the frivolous queen of popular imagination. What happened to Marie Antoinette's children was both personal tragedy and historical symbol. Their stories remind us that behind every great political transformation lie individual human experiences of love, loss, hope, and despair. They lived at the hinge of history, witnesses to the death of one world and the birth of another. Today, more than 2 centuries later, their graves in Austria and France continue to attract visitors who come not only to honor their memory, but to reflect on the timeless themes their lives represent. The vulnerability of innocence, the cost of political change, and the enduring power of family love in the face of unimaginable adversity. In the end, what happened to Marie Antoinette's children was what happens to all of us. They lived, loved, suffered, and died as the world changed around them. Their unique circumstances made them symbols, but their fundamental humanity makes them eternally relevant to anyone seeking to understand how individuals navigate the currents of history that shape their times.